Hey, everybody. It is Wednesday, January 21st, 2026, and the situation in Iran is not calming down. I know it's not in the news as much ever since the protests were quelled by the martial law and the mass murder of protesters by the regime, and President Trump seemingly backing away from taking action on behalf of the protesters after saying help is on the way. More on that later in the video. Make sure you stick around for some news about President Trump. But first, let's take a look at what we're seeing. This is reported yesterday on Fox News. Iranian soldiers sentenced to death for refusing to fire on protesters during nationwide unrest. Witnesses claimed Javid Khalis, that's his name, refused to shoot in an act of humanity, activists report. Now, the Iran Human Rights Society has reported this, and they've said that according to informed sources, when faced with the command to shoot at protesting people, he refused to execute the order, leading to his immediate arrest and the opening of a case against him. He's now being held in Isfahan prison, and there is a fear that he will be executed very soon because the sentence comes at a time when judiciary officials have openly spoken of summary trials, meaning very quick trials, and the swift execution of death sentences against those arrested in the protests. In other words, they want to deal with this very quickly. They want this to not only get rid of these protesters and kill them, but they want it to be a reign of terror. They want to strike fear into anyone who would protest. So by carrying out these executions very quickly, that enforces absolute obedience. And this type of refusal to follow orders and people from within the regime turning on the regime is something that we're seeing more and more of. Here is a chilling clip of a girl, a young woman, who is the daughter of a senior commander in the regime forces, phoning into a show in Persian that is a show of dissidents, Persian dissidents in the diaspora, talking about everything going on in Iran. And she calls into the show to talk about her life and her experiences living as the daughter of one of the most brutal commanders in the regime. Let's watch the clip, and then I have a few things to say about it afterwards.
بله، من خیلی ترس و استرس دارم. میتونم بگم هم سطح جنایتکار رادان هست پدر من فقط میخوام یه چیزی رو بگم جان به مردم ایران، به این سرکوبگرا حواستون باشه. این فرمانده هاتون ساک و چمدوناشون رو بستن. برای من که دخترش هستم، برای مادرم، برای تمام اعضای خانوادمون پاسپورت های جعلی درست کردن با اسم مشخصات جعلی که ما رو فراری بدن به خارج. پدر من چمدون دلار تو خونه قایم کرده. مدام با تلفنش منو بگین بیام دادگاه لاهه. من یه آدم زندم، شاهدم که چه جنایتایی فقط پدر خود من کرده.
فاطمه جان،
الان دستور میده بکشین. من کجا بیام؟ من عکس دارم، فیلم دارم، مدارک دارم. ما اینا نیستیم. من سر جنبش محض رفتم، منو گرفتن با 3 تا از دوستان، ولی منو شناختن. پدرم اومد منو آزاد کرد. تو همون خونه باتون به سر من شوکر زد به من.
پدرت؟
باتون زد که من نرم، ولی دوستامو ول نکردم، به اونا تجاوز شد. ما این درد داره به کی بیایم بگیم بابا این لامصب پدرم، ولی من ازش متنفرم. ما اینا رو نمیخوایم. ما از خانواده ایناییم، ولی اینو دارن بچه هاشونم میکشن، سرکوب میکنن. که دست باتون دادن، شکر برقی دادن، تفنگ دادن که ببین همشهریات رو بکشی. میدونی اینا تقریبا تو خودش اولین کسایی که فرار میکنن همینان. شما کجا میخواین جواب بدی؟ با کی جواب میخواین بدی؟ نکنید، همشهریاتون رو نکشید. من تلفنمو میذارم رو خط، هر اطلاعاتی که بخواید، هر دادگاهی بخواید، پیش هر رئیس جمهوری بخواید، میام میگم اینا کیان، چه کارهای کثیفی که نکردن. از خونه شروع کردن تجاوز کردن به بچه هاشون. میفهمید؟ میدونین ما خودمون چه دردی کشیدیم از این پدرهای سنگدل. به زور سرمون چادر کردن، نماز گفتن بخون، نماز شب بخون. من زایدم به اون اسلامشون. من هنوز محجبم به خاطر اجبار پدرم مادرم. ما خودمون زد کشیدیم. من اگه توانی داشتم اولین نفری بودم که اینو بکشم. من 2 بار خودکشی کردم ولی ناموفق بود. به خاطر مادرم نجاتم داد. نمیتونستم از بچگی این رنگو تحمل کنم. اینا همه خانوادهشون مثل شبخانی نیستن. همه اونطوری با بچه‌هاشون رفتار نمیکنن. این نیروی سرکوبگر همین امروز اون باتومه تو بذار کنار، برو پیش مردم. من بچه اونام. من با اون نون حروم اون بزرگ شدم. شرم بر من.
تو گناهی نداری دخترم، تو خودت قربانی و درود به شجاعتت.
نیست اگه بودم کاری میکردم، دستم خالی. من سنی ندارم.
داری کاری میکنی، این همین تماست بزرگترین کاری بوده که انجام دادی. تو کار بزرگی، تو خیلی شجاعی.
پادشاه ما رو نجات بده. اگه صدای منو میشنوی، همیشه به ما گفتن این خاندان بد بودن، ظلم بودن، ظالم بودن، ولی چشم باز کردم دیدم نه، واقعیت چیز دیگه است. ظلم بالا سرمه، گوشمه، پدرمه، مادرمه. بعد یه چیزی هم میخواستم بگم. اینا خیلی ریزش کردن، دارن مدام زنگ میزنن به فک و فامیل، التباس میکنن با دلارهای زیاد که بیاین جزو نیروی سرکوبگر شین، اعتراضات رو خاموش کنین. نمیان، میترسن. خیلی ریزش کردن.
فاطمه از مردم ترسیدن.
هوشیار باشین مردم. من دارم بهتون میگم اولین تخت به توپ بشه جا دارن، پاسپورت دارن به اسم جعلی، دلار دارن، خونه های آنتنانی دارن. من میتونم از این امکانات استفاده کنم ولی خودمو به خطر انداختم. دارم بهتون میگم بذارین کنار، دستتون رو بیشتر از این به خون آلوده نکنین.
فاطمه جانم تماس رو قطع نکن، اجازه بده من همکارانم پشت خط با تو باشن و اجازه بده
منو اسمم فاطمه نیست.
الان هیچی نمیخواد بگی. الان هیچی نمیخواد بگی فاطمه.
گوهر عشقیم. من محشامیم. من نیکام.
تو عزیز دلی، تو شجاعی، تو شیرزنی.
تلفنی که کردم من شاید بدارم منو بکشه، شاید بفهمد، شاید نمیدونم. من هیچ امنیت جانی ندارم چون برام پیش اومد. من رفتم اعتراض کردم، پشت مهسا بودم. چرا اون دختر شهرستانی بود، مهمون ما بود، چرا کشتنش؟ منو گرفتم بردم خیابون وزارت اطلاعات وزرا. اگه بشناسین چه جاییه، با چه جور تحقیر با ما رفتار کردم. بعد که فهمیدم که منو آزاد کردن، دوستان به من گفتن خوش به حاله، اسم پدرتو دادی آزادت کردن، ولی ننگ بر من. و همون دوستان تو اون زندان تجاوز شد.
Okay, let me unpack what we just saw there. So she describes going to the Masa protest. Now, what that's referring to is Masa Amini was the name of a young woman a number of years back who was arrested for not wearing a hijab and was murdered in custody. And that led to widespread protests across Iran, massive protests. That was the last time there were huge protests in Iran a few years ago. And she's talking about an experience of going to the Masa protest, that she was near Masa and that she and a group of her friends, because this protest had a lot of women in it protesting against the hijabs, that they were arrested and that she was released because of who her father was, and her friends were then raped in prison. She also talks about the fact that that living in her father's house, they're preparing their escape. They have fake passports. They have money in suitcases, and that they try to get the whole family involved. And she talks about the atrocities that her father has committed. So, obviously we have to praise this young woman's courage, but we also realize that there is a lot of dissent within Iran. There's a brutal group of people who are killing other Iranians. They're killing their own children, as she puts it. Now, let me back up for a second and give you a sense of how this all looks. Iran's a huge country, 80 to 90 million people. The Iranian regime, think of it like a political party. Think of it like in China, the Chinese Communist Party. The Iranian regime is about 150,000 people plus their families. So if you expand 150,000 individuals who are members of the regime, members of the IRGC, and include their families, assuming, let's say, 5-6 people to a family. So what we're talking about here is probably around 750,000 people, maybe between 500,000 and 1 million people who are really who have an interest in the regime going on. These are the regime families. So it's not a small thing. This isn't, and I've said this before, Iran is not like Syria or Libya or Iraq, where you have this tiny little family that are dictators, and if you remove them, everyone's free. The IRGC, the regime, is actually a significant population. Now, that said, seeing these defections, seeing refusal to carry out orders to kill people, seeing someone like this girl who comes from one of the IRGC families, talking about the atrocities of her father, we have to assume that there's a lot more of this going on. It will be successful in bringing down the regime. Now, let me get back to some of the other things that we've seen. So in terms of defections, we already saw this video. This is about a week old. This is a member of the regime army wearing his uniform, but holding up a picture of President Trump, and he praises President Trump. This is back when Trump was saying help was on the way, and he's going to help the protesters, and more on that in a moment. We also have members of the protesters, and here, this video is entirely in Persian with no English subtitles, but I'll just read to you what he says. The numbers they have told you are lies. They say 12,000 people were killed. This is false. They've killed more than 30,000 people. And then he issues a warning to members of the regime forces, saying that when this is all said and done, we're not going to have any mercy on you. And then he thanks the people outside Iran for being their voice. Now, on this issue of Trump not carrying out his threats, this is a very big issue. And we're seeing more and more stories like this. Here's a headline in Time: he doesn't care about us. Iranian protesters say they were betrayed by Trump. This is a very serious issue, because as a result of Trump saying help is on the way, as a result of Trump saying if they kill protesters, we are going to do something, it emboldened the protesters with, it's incredible courage that they showed, but it made them less afraid to go further and further with the protests, believing that if they pushed the regime, eventually Trump was going to be stepping in. Again, he said help is on the way. He talked about acting so soon that they wouldn't even have time for negotiations, and then he backed off. And it's safe to say that many more protesters have died as a result of President Trump not fulfilling these threats than would have died had he not made the threats at all. But even with President Trump, he hasn't fully backed off. He's not done yet. There was an interview on News Nation yesterday with Katie Pavlich that we're going to take a look at here. Let's have a look at what Trump has to say.
There are reports that they are still burning thousands of protesters alive. They also issued an assassination threat against you over the weekend. I know that you can't talk about what's on the table, but what is your response to Iran's leadership in the regime continuing to taunt you, threaten you, especially given over the weekend you said it's time for new leadership in Iran?
Well, they shouldn't be doing it, but I've left notification. Anything ever happens, we're going to blow the whole country is going to get blown up. So we've, originally Biden should have said something, when they made a statement. We always said, why isn't Biden saying anything? Because he didn't. But a president has to defend a president. Like if I were here and they were making that threat to somebody, not even a president, but somebody like they did with me, I would absolutely hit them so hard. But I have very firm instructions. Anything happens, they're going to wipe them off the face of this earth.
All right, so folks, to be perfectly honest, I don't know what to make of this new Trump threat. If anything happens, I'm going to wipe them off the face of the earth. Most of President Trump's statement there was about the fact that the Iranian regime tried to assassinate President Trump, and there's Trump calling out Biden for not doing anything about it, because here's a former president of the United States, and there's a threat being made on his life, and he's saying that Biden should have stepped in and done something. But Katie Pavlich started the question by pointing out that they're still burning protesters, they're still killing protesters, and what are you going to do? And Trump seems to be indicating that if things go sideways, he's still going to step in and do something. And again, based on what we saw last week, it's hard to take the threat seriously. But suffice it to say that the story is not over. We're going to be watching this as closely as we can. Let's remember that information is coming out of Iran really piecemeal. They've really clamped down on the internet and on ability to communicate. But we're going to be bringing you whatever updates we can on this very tense and changing situation.